Okay, well, I am happy to do, Henrike, is really good to finally get to have this conversation going. Since we are all in kind of different places, and I can see that can you tell me where you are first?
Yes, I'm at home, obviously. I'm in my studio and actually inside one of my installations because, during the lockdown times, I got a bit, like missing exhibitions and installing and seeing the work. So we set up one of my works in the studio. So, so to have like a place to come and actually see a work and also get a bit back in touch with the material, and so we're sitting inside one of my installations in the studio.
It's a new installation, or it's a work that you've already shown before?
It's a new
part
version.
Of it.
It's a part of a new version of actually my first installation I did in 2012, Triangular Stories, where I shot 2 home videos that on VHS that are embedded in a youth room setting, and this is another setting of the same work that we created with a sleeping room from a woman from Vienna that had the whole room decorated in the same fabrics, and I was able to get it complete as a full set with lamps and everything in 2018. Until then it was in use, and then created this a bit as a frame for these videos.
So when you me, I am I'm in upstate New York with my friend. So my friends fled the city, completely left, turned in their apartment, turned in their studios, and left New York to come upstate. And they invited me to come over, which was really nice. Because New York is you get a little bit of cabin fever, and it's really nice up here. But now I'm in the basement of my friend who's an artist, and they're setting up the studio down here. So I'm also in an artist studio, but completely it's a different kind. Is the footage that's playing on the TV, is that that newsroom footage that you made for the show?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's footage that we produced because for me, coming from a background as a costume designer, scenographer, I was always like working on the illusion of filmmaking, of how to create sets that would tell a story about a certain time, but I was never really interested in fiction. I was always more drawn to documentary formats. So like even in film school, I always wanted to go to documentary festivals and was not so interested in the big scenography heavy films, and so my diploma from film school actually was my first step in exploring how scenography and how the tools of creating a scenographic illusion can actually be used to create documents of found footage, or play with the idea of what is real and what is fake, and how these artifacts may trick us into believing something. And so it's a film we produce, but it's supposed to be not clear if I could have also found it and just put it here, just like the bed, for example.
Right. When you found this apartment of the lady in Vienna, and you said you finally managed to gather all this material in 2018, were you, so when you initially made the show, you used certain elements of the apartment, and then now you finally managed to gather everything. In this period, did you establish a relationship with this person? With the person who's,
Normally, yes, but this was a bit of a remote production because I was not in Vienna at the time. I was looking at the beautiful Austrian website will haben, which is German and means I want to have, and it's the equivalent of like eBay for like secondhand stuff, and so I was on will haben, and then I found these pictures that really looked like a time capsule, because I think she also used pictures she took in the 90s of the room to advertise it now, and so I was like, okay, I want to preserve this time capsule, and then I asked the curators from the Kunsthalle Bratislava, where the exhibition was, which is close to Vienna, to go there and pick it up. And so unfortunately, I was not there myself. I just met the furniture then for the first time in the exhibition. Right. Yeah. But a lot of time,
sorry, yeah, I was gonna follow up by that exactly. Like, and a lot of times you also bring you know, elements and furniture and other kind of material from you know, people's houses, and I just wanted to maybe you can talk a little bit about how you approach people, how you sort the material, what kind of relation or not. You know, I think I'm curious what how you approach the kind of sorting out of these you know, homestead material. They belong to someone's home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I like to search because I do a lot of like search online to see, like when I'm invited to a specific city to do a new production in the museum, I always start by looking at the web pages, what the people want to get rid of, and for me that's the first step in getting to know the city and the people that live there. What do the homes look like? What is the stuff that they don't need anymore, or how, what's in general the relationship to things and to furniture? Like, is it something that you rather keep to give it to your children or something, or is it something that you want to change every 10 years, or like this? Tells a lot about the place that I'm in, and because there's so much, I always try to find interesting search terms to narrow down, like, and then I usually look for very emotional words, like how people describe their things. For example, beautiful, and finally, if I look for beautiful, it's probably the most ugly stuff, because I think, or stuff that is very, very hard to coin as beautiful, and I find it very interesting because it's sometimes then also the owners of the furniture trying to give it some, because there's something special about the furniture, but it's also maybe not practical and a bit weird. And then it's being emphasized as beautiful because this is a subjective thing, so no one can judge that. And so going with these like very subjective descriptions of basically the emotions towards the furniture, or also the descriptions that the owners want the potential buyers to see in them, like I'm often the most interesting search.
Right.
Yeah.
And this kind of emotional content, or this emotional relationship with objects, you I feel it's one of the things that, you know, carries on in some of your work, and I feel part of it is that also you try to, you know, walk this kind of really difficult line between, you know, a kind of emotional attachment to something that could also be quite menacing. You know, the home is in this way could become not necessarily, you know, a cozy, nice space for your shelter, but it also could become a space where it could be menacing, could be dangerous. It could really be, let's say, permeated or defined by ideology. But maybe we'll get to that in a little later. I thought that maybe to continue kind of this thread, maybe you would talk about the last exhibition you had up in view before the lockdown in Munich, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that too. But first, I just wanted to ask, I guess in Germany you guys have already opened, but was this show on view during lockdown? Was it in the galleries, but the museum was closed and no one could see it, or it just ended before you went to lockdown?
Yes, so it was supposed to be open until end of March, and we wanted to have like a big finissage and a talk and everything, and then the lockdown came and it was closed for public, and then we already had planned to like take it down a month later, getting it all back into the storage, labeling everything, and then this was on hold, and a bit it stayed inside the closed museum for a long time, like a bit like it became part of a permanent exhibition, but one that no one can see, like only the one technicians that would still like checking the alarm every day. But in a way, I don't know, at first I was sad that the exhibition couldn't continue. In a way, it was also, I liked that this very big and very heavy and very complicated work somehow was frozen in time, and of course I was hoping that at some point it would open again and maybe it would be like prolonged the exhibition, but the moment it was clear that the museums would be stayed closed longer, there was a decision to take it down, so then it was
so do you want to maybe a little bit talk about this show and how it came about, because I think it is also very specific. I mean, this question, I mean, as you mentioned, when you are invited to do a show in a place, you do a lot of, I mean, that the example you're making is that, you know, what kind of people are getting rid of. I mean, I have a friend, Rafael Dominic, and he says that, you know, or he quoted, I don't remember who, but saying that, you know, what people get rid of in a society can tell you a little bit about that society. And this question of trash, for instance, and how, you know, for instance, in America, I feel like it's a trash society. But that aside, I was just wanted to kind of go back to this question of when you get invited, you try to research that local context. In many cases, try to see what people are getting rid of and try to buy those furniture or find a context of interest. Is that the same thing that you did in this show? Because it seems like you also worked with stuff that people not only didn't decide to get rid of, but actually decided to keep. So, so maybe you can talk about that context of that show and how it came about a little bit.
Yes, because yeah, this practice of looking what people have in their home and what like what is still there, but on the edge of being given away, and this is where I come into, like maybe even save from destruction. And with the Haus der Kunst in Munich, where they invited me to produce a work, it was a bit like it, but also a bit different. Maybe I start by showing a picture. Wait. Because this is the installation I produced for Haus der Kunst in Munich, and what we see in the front is furniture that I could find like basically in the basement of Haus der Kunst, but it was not like a recent leftover of the last 20-30 years, but it was actually the original furniture from when Haus der Kunst was built in Third Reich. So like furniture from the 30s that the Atelier Trost that were responsible for a lot of interior design in the Third Reich of Adolf Hitler and other like big Nazi leaders. So there was this like intense situation that not only could I go on eBay to see what people in Munich were getting rid of, but I could even go a lot deeper in darker places and see what furnitures were in the museum when it was opened in the 30s, and for me I was a bit scared, to be honest, because I didn't know what this would do or how I could work with furniture that is so charged, because what I do in my work is basically trying to look at every piece of furniture as something that could be charged or that can have ideological implementation through the design or through the use. And so like every CD stand for me can be like a weapon or something very dangerous or something very evilly charged. And then having these furniture from Third Reich, like for me was a bit like, okay, I don't know where this is going. So so I was like, yeah, doing very small steps towards that. So doing like having several visits to Munich to see the furniture, going to the archives in Munich where the private like possessions and also all the drafts and materials of the Adolf Hitler's interior designer Gerdi Trost were just last year released for researchers to see. So I could go to the archives, I could really like move forward reading and learning more, and then until finally getting these furniture pieces out of the basement, and then for 2 weeks working with them in the space. And what I did was I took this big exhibition room of Haus der Kunst where the group exhibition was, and I had this big room, and I realized that because of course the whole architecture of Haus der Kunst is very, very Third Reich, like ideology through architecture, like very symmetric, very like this neoclassicism and this like what Albert Speer coined as ruin value. So to make very big structures that even after destruction would still be looking good as ruins in a way. And
yeah.
and I also called the work Ruinenwert, but so ruin value, but to not look so much at the architecture, but rather at the furniture. So what can these furniture pieces tell us about Third Reich, about fascism, about this time after, like, yeah, this past, or the years that have passed. And what I did is I mixed the furniture with the furniture I sourced on eBay in Munich. So it was mixed. So there were these furniture pieces from 38, and there were things that I just picked up, or my team in Munich from people's homes, and this created a tension in the room, because going through, you would look at every piece of furniture like trying to see what it's about, or like everything is very like a bit suspicious, because you look at a furniture piece and you wonder, is it a piece where Hitler sat on, for example, or it's something that my neighbors gave away. And so then like there's a big suspicion towards this furniture, and everything gets very weird. And so in a way, it was for me also a way to engage the viewer very much in looking at everything with this suspicion, and so that there's no like normal furniture anymore, but everything is carrying information that we need to decode in a way. And yeah, oh my God, I'm realizing I talk for hours about the work. Yeah, maybe you come again.
Yeah. I wonder, I have a couple of quick questions. One is that, so there is this, in a lot of your work, you have been very interested in a certain form of postmodern design, like the POMO design. And here, it seems that you're having a combination of, let's say, the kind of the Third Reich furniture. But is there is this more a juxtaposition of, let's say, these two periods, or did you do you have, let's say, furniture here from the 50s or the 60s or later? Or I feel the reason I bring that up, I think that could be a good segue to some other work that you have done. But the first question is that is this basically these two periods? Or it's like a kind of more of a longer trajectory of, let's say, furniture design that you could find?
I think for me, it was a way of trying to interlace the topics I'm working on that deal with German history, but in a very like going as deep and as far as I could go, because a lot of my work was very primarily based on, in the beginning of my work, very much on the 90s and the post-unification period in Germany. So the period I experienced vividly as a child and then as a teenager. So this whole aesthetic of the post 89, where all the cheap postmodern furniture from West Germany were suddenly shaping the homes of people in East Germany, but also the public sphere and architecture. So postmodernism had a big impact on me as a child, but without me knowing what this term is. It was just like suddenly there were these shapes that for me as a child were very exciting because they looked like from outer space, and there was no preparation for me, like aesthetically in the GDR, that something like this might happen, that suddenly there would be triangular cabinets. So I, in a way, I started working with this aesthetic to speak about the transformation in East Germany after 1990. But then in the last years, I worked my way back more. So taking a look at the GDR and several works, but always through the lens of the postmodern copy design from the 90s. So the layers would always be in the same room. So while trying to slowly move back in history and having a deeper understanding of the layers that lie underneath the last decades, I would always include the ones after. So basically what also the work in Munich is like a bit like an archaeology of several time layers at the same time. So I'm speaking about the 30s, but also about the 50s and the American occupation. I speak about the 80s in Munich, the 90s, 2000s. So it's all, I try, I think I also, the only way for me to speak about a time that is so distant from now is for me to include the layers on top of it. So I think a work that would be like a historic setting of the 30s for me would not be as interesting as having it in a discussion with the historic breaks that followed. So working in space and in installation gives me the possibility to include a lot of time layers in one room, but also a lot of contradictory thoughts and observations. So it's not linear, but it's a complex collection of layers.
Right. This is kind of like I'll get back to that, but just like a basic question. Were people allowed to sit on these things?
Like in general, people are allowed to sit on my installation. But not like, of course, not everything. Like it's a bit. I always say a bit like when you visit someone at home, what would you do there and what maybe not? Like you would sit on a couch, but not maybe empty all drawers or something like this. So, but with the furniture from the 30s, there was a more like conservation thoughts. So in this work, it was not allowed to sit down. Yeah.
You know, one of the things that we've talked about is this question of, how, let's say, ideology is manifested in material culture, and a lot of the work that you have done, in particular, working with domestic furniture and kind of tracing down the context that maybe created it, but also maybe how they were used. And, in one instance you mentioned, well, post-unification, a lot of these furniture started coming down to flooding the kind of like East German market, and there was this kind of almost like a gap between, or not a gap, but quite of a disjunction aesthetically between what you were kind of used to and then what you later experienced in your life. You've done some work that you in a way created some assemblages of houses that maybe It's the thing. I don't know if I want to get there quite, but the questions of how, you know, maybe, you know, what will the interior kind of design or interior space of like a more kind of right-wing leaning kind of, you know, there has been this kind of question of what kind of aesthetics is being used and how kind of interior space kind of maybe could lead, it could be a signifier of a certain ideological headspace or something. I mean, I understand that could be a little dangerous because it's hard to make a leap between an object like a bed or, but then you had other combinations where, you know, there will be a baseball bat and there will be like a flag and there will be a couple of other items in the furniture that maybe almost, how would you say, almost they work at portraiture, you know, almost they have this, some of those assemblages kind of work like portraiture in a way. But I thought that maybe because here in this work in Munich, you had these juxtaposition of different moments and furniture. Maybe we can go and talk about another project where you you use more or less one set from a very you know, it was less of a collage, but you kind of like decontextualized a set of objects and brought them to a museum, and that is the work that you did in Frankfurt, the 14 words installation. Maybe like that, there is also a kind of a strange, an uncanny relationship between like the more 30s furniture that you used here, and then the story or kind of how you started like putting this exhibition in Frankfurt together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's good that you mentioned this also with the baseball bat, for example, because I think what my, like when I started working on my first installation in 2011, which now I'm realizing it's almost 10 years, and I realized how because I have been constantly going back to same questions or same topics and trying to evolve the discussion, or how, because I think in the beginning of my practice, it was very much motivated by the way to find a voice to speak about certain topics where I felt that there wasn't like a aesthetic language or a way to get them into a discourse that could take place in an art institution, because for me, experiencing a very strong right-wing radicalization in like a general public in the part of Germany where I grew up, it brought me to the, like, I really wanted to find a way of how I could speak about it in order that also people would hear it or see it or want to see it or be interested in it. So trying to find a way to speak about topics that are very upsetting and very like how can I use my tools as an artist to carve something out, so that we are not afraid to speak about it, or that we have tools to speak about it without thinking that it's like something that we just cannot speak about, or that we so I think in the beginning of my practice, it was very much about trying to find a voice and trying to position topics, very like also uncomfortable topics in a art context, and in a way like establishing through the exhibitions, through the installations, with the programs, with the conferences, with screenings, concert, a practice that takes place in the art context, and allows a discussion also with historians, with scientists, with sociologists, so to start a conversation. And in my artistic practice, now looking back at what I did these last years, I realized that after having like a bit started the conversation, I could evolve the language in which I wanted to speak about these topics, because they were started like there was a conversation possible, or it had already started, so I could get more sophisticated also in the means of how I want to address these topics, but also more in a way going deeper, or also more subtle in a way. So so I would not have to put the baseball bat so people would know what I want to talk about. So I don't have to come like this. I need to speak about right-wing radicalization, but I can put a bat and say, I need to speak about this, and this bat is my tool in this instance. And so I realized that I, in my practice, started to become more adventurous and also playful, and how to use this language that I'm trying to create. And I think the work in Frankfurt for me was a very important step, because it was something I had never done before, like in this like radicality. I will show it now.
Yeah, maybe you can talk a little bit about how it came about, because it's a very
because what I tried to do was in this work in 2018, not so much to recreate physical spaces that, like, for example, I create a space and say this was the youth room of these right-wing terrorists from Flickr, but it was more the idea of how could I translate an ideology into a physical space. So when I think about an ideological concept, a structure, how could that manifest itself in architecture, in interior design? So before I started, I also thought, okay, maybe it will be something I will try, and then realize, maybe it's a bit too, I don't know, complicated, or a bit like off to speak about ideology in this, I don't know, a bit poetic, spatial way. So what I did was I found this flower shop that was all in mint and white on eBay Kleinanzeigen in close to where I grew up in East Germany, and it was sold secondhand, and the pictures were already like very like drawing me, or like calling me somehow, because they were all photographed without flowers. So it was a flower shop to be sold, and of course there were like, it was empty because it's something that someone wants to sell, so people want to see what it looks like. But the moment you have a flower shop without flowers, somehow it gets very sad or a bit weird, like, because you start to look at the structure more, because normally if you go in a flower shop, you're completely overwhelmed with smell, with colors, and when the flowers are away, it's very odd to see the structure where they put the vases and everything. So I found this very interesting to speak about structure, or also about like violent structures, and so basically the idea behind was to find a way to speak about the right-wing ideology that was because I had done a lot of works about the National Socialist Underground that was living undercover in the town where I grew up, but I was always very much focusing on a bit of the action, like what happened, how could that happen, what was happening in that year, and very much like trying to document, to understand, to find a way of dealing with the actions, or what happened in a way. But with this work, I wanted to find a spatial interpretation of the reasoning that, or the racist ideology on which these murders that they did were based, and the work is called 14 Words, referring to this. Yes.
Right. No, I just wanted to, yeah, I'll get to this, ask you about, you know, why a flower shop, because that's a very kind of specific reference. And I guess you were just about to talk about that, but sorry to interfere.
Yes, because the flower shop is a reference to the first murder that the National Socialist Underground did in Nuremberg in the year 2000, and Enver Şimşek, who was a flower shop owner, and the whole, like, all of the murders they did were focused on owners of shops with a migrant, post-migrant like biography, and so this ideology of through murders on specific people to try to create a like a destabilization in society, atmosphere of fear, of hate, and like the whole ideology behind is to create a destabilization in society that would lead to people like starting a war, basically. So the idea of trying to create a situation in which a so-called racial war would break out, and then people would murder each other, and towards a white supremacy in society. So that's the cruel ideology, and so for me, this working with this flower shop was a way to get into the structural ideology of imagining a homogenic society, but that would be achieved through murder, war, hate, racism, and in the end, a violently fought for homogenic society, which in the end would be like dead, like a flower shop without flowers.
Yeah. The 14 words obviously is also a specific reference to right-wing manifesto, and you titled your work behind this. Was this also, were they inspired by this manifesto, or how did you make that connection? About maybe you can just like talk about the title a little bit.
Yeah. So
the David Lunge.
Yeah. So the 14 words. Yeah. This right-wing fascist ideology is. If you spell it out, it's we must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. So these 14 words were also referenced like by the National Socialist Underground in the way they produced the video, with like having a design of the video to have room for 14 murder victims, and it was also, I don't know, so much also a violence that is always also very much working with symbolism, or with the design, and with like putting the taking of a human's life in a way to have a symbolic number, and like all this, like the cruelty of this, I was trying to analyze in a structure in the space, basically.
Yeah. When you make an installation like this, how much of this content do you give out? So let's say if you walked into the show in Frankfurt, will you provide, you know, through a wall text or didactic, something about, you know, the 14 words, or the flower shop itself, or these references, or because I'm curious in a way that, you know, for instance, in this case, in this particular instance, there is a certain form of architecture, but also the proprietor of this flower shop was murdered. So in a way, the architecture is let's say, almost could perform a floating signifier in a way, because in this way, the architecture did not belong to, let's say, right-wing radical, but it belonged to an immigrant or someone from an immigrant background who is the proprietor of a flower shop. So and it also that sort of tension, it's still there, but from a different angle. So for instance, when you have the furniture of Third Reich, that's a very specific idea that, you know, you can think about who sat on this furniture, who used this furniture, and this one is in a way different kind of side of that. Or let's say this furniture was almost like a setup for a life that was taken away. You know, it became like a setup for murder almost. But I was just like curious, how do you communicate the information? Because given the context of these works, and how do you kind of, because I feel a lot of your projects also are very specifically think through almost surgically this question of framing. How can you frame an object, or can you present an object in a different context, and kind of like using the gallery, using the exhibition space as a framing device to kind of like bring in these conversations through this, you know, the ideological manifestation with, or kind of how ideology, let's say, manifests itself through material culture and object. You know, so yeah, just curious about how you contextualize them. For someone that's who walks in and doesn't know anything about this.
Yeah, I think especially now that I'm trying to get more, like more reduced in the form, or not reduced, but more like more interpretative. So more, I think the information for me is always very crucial, and I believe in information and in giving it to visitors very much. But so for me, there's always a text, and it will always be accessible and also readable and understandable. So I always, so I want to give people the information that now that they've maybe heard about something that they didn't know of before, or are interested in get involved or find out more, that there's all the hints to also make research on yourself, like by yourself, for example. But when you enter my work, I want you to at first have an experience by yourself. So just with the work. So I try to position the information a bit more in the middle or in the end. So that at first the work can speak to you just by the way it can.
Right.
So, because for me, text and research is very important, but I always realized that the linear format like text or film in a classical sense are not my first medium of choice. So I use them as tools as well in my work, but the space and the simultaneous existence of different things in one space, like this is the medium that speaks to me the most, because it's the complexity of opposing things in the same space. So and the moment you enter an installation or see a work for the first time, the work also needs to do the speaking. So I want the works to have a conversation with the visitors by themselves, just with their language, and then a bit like an iceberg where there's the tip that looks up, but the more information you get, you can dig deeper. And after reading a text, for example, or speaking to a guide, the whole work might have a completely new facet to it. And so but yeah.
Sorry. I was just gonna say, I mean, it's interesting when you mentioned you have, you know, the text would be something that you would access, you would have access to like maybe a little later as you kind of experience the exhibition. That brings me to this other question that I've been meaning to ask you, and it's, you know, how would you say, it's more related to the question of performance and question of time, because I feel like while, I mean, even in how you think about the distribution of information, you kind of incorporate the temporal experience of the work in the installation. And while these objects have this appearance of these static objects that are signifiers of maybe certain form of design or certain moment in time or manifestation of certain moment in time through design, you also, you know, it also seems almost like a space that the audience also might assume the role of a performer, or kind of might assume the role of a participant in this set. And at first, I think that's almost, you know, I was just curious if there was that had anything to do with your, you know, how you first started making work, or can you talk about this kind of relationship with performance maybe, or time, you know?
Yeah, because I like before studying at film school, I was studying theater and like stage and costume design, and I was like yeah, very interested in the performance and the space and how to create like this sort of magic of a performance for a certain time. I also do performance sometimes, like organize performances, but I don't want to like link them permanently to an exhibition or an installation, or because sometimes I'm asked if it would be interesting, for example, that someone would be sleeping here all the time, or like inhabiting the space, but I always felt like, no, it's not right, but I was not sure why I didn't like the idea, because normally, why not? Or like, but then I realized that there was someone lying here and I would be coming here as a visitor. I would not feel like this could be for me. I would feel, this is her space, she's sleeping here, I'm just a visitor or a guest. But when I come to the space by myself, suddenly this belongs to me, or is something that puts me in the position of the owner of this place, or of, it gives me an intimate moment with the work where I can immerse myself into being in that certain life. And so, yeah, I think you described it well to say that the visitor in that moment becomes the performer that I create the stage design for. So I basically create these spaces for the visitor to have like a show, or like something where like a performance themselves to so to also a way to make this very complicated, very detailed works that then suddenly are there for you. So it also makes objects that are very maybe not so special, or something that you would rather think about throwing to the trash, suddenly when it's taken so seriously and put there for you to see and to sit on and to get interpret even, or to make a lecture about, suddenly these very banal and sorted out objects of our time and society suddenly change. And I think this for me is a very important point, because for me the most interesting objects are the ones that people are not so interested in. So I'm always drawn to these things that seem to have no cultural value, because they're mass produced, because they are ugly, heavy, they fall to pieces when you just look at them. And so what happens when we take them seriously, when we put them into museums and say they could be a signifier of our culture and time, and yeah.
Do you think that you almost there's also like this other aspect of your work that is some kind of like, you know, a certain archive of material culture in a way? I mean, I assume that as you make more, you know, during the years, these projects that you make, it's like a sort of indexing of a lot of these objects in many different contexts that you found from different periods. And I thought that, you know, there is this other aspect of your work that maybe doesn't become immediately accessible by looking at what installation, but when you look at 10 years of work, it almost feels that there's this, you know, strange archival aspect to it, because you know, once, let's say, these shows, if they don't belong to a collection later, maybe a lot of them also, and even if they do, you have an index of these works, you know, it almost becomes this, yeah, in a way, as I said, like it almost also performs as an archive throughout the years.
Mm-hmm.
Something else that I thought would be interesting to think about, and I know we're almost running out of time, but was this question of, you know, question of fabrication versus your methodology of sorting and gathering and creating a space. And I think that speaks to another issue that actually maybe now more than ever we're all thinking about, is that, you know, what does it mean to produce an object and put it out in this world? And a lot of your work also is using existing material. Sometimes, like, you know, in this case, in the setup that you're actually you are in now, you know, part of it you've shown before, and now you've added to it. So it's something I wouldn't want to call it. It's kind of it's almost like using art as creating a different purpose for these objects, existing objects. You know, it's almost like repurposing, retooling, or detouring certain set of objects to different ends. And in a way, also each exhibition, you know, once it's over, maybe it has, in a very basic way, it also has a much less impact on the environment, for instance, in terms of creating additional waste or things like that. So there's also like this kind of, I like to call it the economy of means to the work, and I felt maybe that's again like something that is not immediate to the work, but I feel like it's one of the underlying process of making the work. Does that make sense to you at all?
Yes, because I think because I did so many different things also before starting to work as a visual artist. It took a while for me to realize that this reassembling of things is also like an artistic practice. It's because it's a practice that doesn't want to produce new things, but rather look what's there and try to make sense of them, maybe for the first time in some cases. Like a lot of things that I find very interesting are maybe the ones where it's hard to imagine that they at some point made a lot of sense and then lost it, but some of these like shapes and forms I work with, like it feels a bit like they were already born outdated, or they're so dysfunctional that no one really used them, or like this.
Right.
Trying to take all these objects and say, okay, you had a rough start, and now it's already somehow your lifespan is already ending, but I want to see if I can find a different purpose, or take you in a way serious that you can speak about things that you can communicate about, or about it's basically trying to make sense of all the stuff, and so yeah, this creates an archive, but not only like physical archive, which I'm trying to keep in control, but also an archive of shapes and forms, because for example, working so long with the leftovers of Germany, for example,
right,
you start to know every lamp shade, or like there's new colors, or it comes in a different form, but it starts to make sense to me. So I know all the weird cheap furniture stores from the 80s, from the province in West Germany. So trying to get a understanding of something that maybe doesn't want to be understood, where maybe also the designers that designed it back in the days would not want their names linked to it. So trying to get an understanding of something, to see if that could be a strategy to understand the society I'm in, or the
I love what you said, that you're working with the leftover of Germany. It's such a beautiful way to put it. That's like a really interesting way of putting it. I just wanted to say, I feel like we're kind of running out of time, but I wanted to say, thank you for being in video with me, because one thing we talked about is that this COVID maybe separated us physically, but then we're all together in video. But on that front, I just feel, yeah, I mean, there's a lot more to talk about, but I feel like maybe we can stop here. But I kind of want to kind of think about this this question, or just the way this description of, you know, working with the leftover of Germany to me was very kind of like almost like again, another surgical way to put this kind of relationship between what is left out and what does that say. But also this another aspect of the work, which is really about musicological or museological in that sense, where, you know, there is like an aspect of, you know, taking these objects and keeping them and kind of like recirculating them in a different way, which I think obviously museums do in many ways. And this is another kind of like aspect of thinking about history of these objects. But yeah, I mean, if you don't have anything in addition to say, maybe I will talk to you soon.
Yes, yeah, it was, yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you to KW for hosting, and yeah.
Yeah, I also wanted to thank Raphael for helping us do this as seamlessly as possible.
Yeah, and thanks to me and Clemens as well in the background. Okay.
I wish I could see everyone. I hope to see you soon. Okay.
Yes, please. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.